The flickering gaslight, a tame and yellow thing, cast long, dancing shadows across the cramped confines of Laboratory 7B, where Alistair Finch, a man of quiet industry and burgeoning intellect, meticulously logged the final readings for his thesis on anomalous crystalline structures. The hour was well past midnight, the hallowed halls of Miskatonic University hushed save for the distant mournful chime of a town clock and the persistent hum of the archaic ventilation system that served as the institution's asthmatic respiration. A chill, unseasonable even for late autumn in Arkham, seemed to seep from the very stones, wrapping itself around the young chemist as he scribbled in his ledger, his breath misting faintly in the air. He paused, a faint frown creasing his brow. The flame of the Bunsen burner at the adjacent station, typically a steady, vibrant azure, had taken on a peculiar, almost sickly cast. It pulsed with an inward ethereal glow, a hue not quite violet nor cerulean, but something else entirely, a colour that felt wrong, a visual discord that prickled at the edges of his scientific certainty. Alistair, ever the pragmatist, assumed a faulty gas mixture, perhaps a decaying nozzle, and made a mental note to report it to the groundskeeper in the morning. But then his gaze drifted to the row of pristine glass beakers awaiting sterilization. One, a stout Erlenmeyer flask he'd left filled with distilled water, shimmered faintly. As he watched, a hairline fracture spiderwebbed across its surface, growing with a soft, almost inaudible zing, before the entire vessel collapsed inward upon itself, crumbling into a fine, sparkling dust that settled on the scarred wooden bench. The water inexplicably had vanished, leaving no trace of moisture. Alistair's heart gave a sudden, sharp lurch. Glass, especially the heat-resistant borosilicate used in university labs, did not simply disintegrate. Not without extreme force, not without a shattering impact. He approached the station slowly, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. The peculiar flame on the Bunsen burner seeming to pulsate with renewed intensity, its strange colour deepening. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against the fine, almost powdery residue where the beaker had stood. It felt unnervingly cold, yet oddly energetic, a faint static clinging to his skin. He spent the next hour examining the fragments, or rather, the dust. Under the powerful lens of the lab's microscope, the particles appeared crystalline, iridescent, catching the light in a way that defied classification. They were not glass, not silica, but something alien, something that seemed to absorb light and re-emit it in that same unholy, unnameable hue. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to emanate from the dust, a visual resonance that made his eyes ache and his head throb with a dull insistence. Alistair vaguely recalled a hushed, almost apocryphal tale circulating among the older faculty members, whispers of a meteorite sample, delivered years ago from a desolate farmstead near the outskirts of Arkham, a sample that had supposedly shrunk and disappeared within the university's physics laboratory. A curious anecdote, dismissed by most as collegiate folklore or the ravings of senescent minds, but now a chilling correlation began to form. Had it truly disappeared, or had it merely escaped? A sudden, sharp cough tore through the silence, emanating from the corner where the lab's air intake vent hummed with its rhythmic drone. The vent cover, secured by rusted screws, vibrated with an unnatural intensity, and from its louvers a faint, almost crystalline dust seemed to drift, catching the strange light of the Bunsen burner flame. Alistair watched, transfixed by a growing dread, as the fine motes swirled in the stagnant air, exhibiting that same unearthly luminescence, that same indescribable colour. It wasn't merely a dust, it was an emanation, a subtle corruption bleeding into the very atmosphere of the laboratory. He found himself fighting a sudden, profound fatigue, a lethargy that clawed at his senses, clouding his usually sharp intellect. The meticulous precision of his work seemed utterly trivial, meaningless. He gathered his notes, sealed them in a satchel, and extinguished the aberrant flame, plunging the lab into a deeper gloom that only seemed to intensify the subtle alien shimmer he now perceived everywhere. The ventilation system, that wheezing conduit of filtered air, now seemed a malicious subterranean artery, pumping something unspeakable through the ancient veins of Miskatonic University. He felt a nascent irrational terror bloom in his chest, a sense of an unseen horror creeping from the very fabric of reality, threatening to unravel the ordered cosmos of his understanding. The next few days brought with them an escalating series of minor yet unsettling incidents. The glassware in Alistair's lab continued its inexplicable degradation, often found crumbled to dust or etched with intricate non-Euclidean patterns that seemed to pulse with that same unearthly colour. The copper wiring in the antiquated equipment developed a brittle fragility, snapping without provocation, while the Bunsen burner flames across the chemistry department exhibited the same sickly, unidentifiable hue. Laboratory animals, particularly the cage mice used for physiological experiments, grew increasingly agitated, scratching incessantly at their enclosures, their eyes wide and glassy, reflecting an unseen spectrum of light. One morning, Professor Armitage, a stoic and venerable scholar of esoteric linguistics, discovered his prized collection of antique alchemical glassware reduced to a glittering pile of motes, sparking a furious yet ultimately bewildered diatribe about structural fatigue and faulty craftsmanship. Alistair, however, knew better. He had begun to meticulously track the incidents, noting their proximity to the ventilation ducts that snaked through the university's labyrinthine infrastructure. The pattern was undeniable. The degradation was most pronounced near the vents, and it seemed to spread concentrically outwards, albeit slowly. He tried to explain his findings to his advisor, Dr. Theron Blackwood, a man of formidable intellect and even more formidable skepticism. "Finch, my dear boy," Blackwood had boomed, his voice a gravelly rumble that filled the high-ceilinged office. "Glass does not spontaneously decompose. Such an assertion flies in the face of every known principle of chemistry and physics. Are you certain you haven't been overworking? Perhaps a touch of imaginative interpretation." Alistair recounted the disintegrating beaker, the strange flame, the unearthly dust. He even produced a small vial of the residue, though he admitted its properties defied standard analysis. Blackwood examined the vial under his desk lamp, his brow furrowed in a mixture of professional curiosity and profound disdain. The dust seemed inert, a harmless iridescent powder, yet Alistair saw the faint, unsettling shimmer within its depths, a hidden light that Blackwood perhaps could not perceive. "Highly unusual, I grant you," Blackwood conceded, tapping the vial with a long, bony finger. "But surely a localized phenomenon. Perhaps a new strain of fungus affecting silica, or an obscure vibrational frequency. The ventilation theory..." Preposterous, Finch. A mere system for air circulation, not a conduit for some fantastical corrosive entity. He dismissed Alistair with a paternal pat on the shoulder, advising rest and a renewed focus on verifiable scientific phenomena. But Alistair could not rest. He felt a creeping dread, a conviction that something utterly anomalous was at work, something that transcended the neat categories of scientific understanding. The first whispers of a more profound affliction began to circulate within the faculty common rooms. Professor Waldron, a celebrated mathematician known for his unparalleled work in non-Euclidean geometries, started lecturing his advanced calculus class on the inherent flaws in dimensional perception, illustrating his points with intricate sprawling diagrams on the blackboard that seemed to twist and coil beyond the constraints of 2 dimensions. His students, a mixture of baffled brilliance and utter confusion, described his eyes as holding a peculiar, restless light. Then there was Dr. Albright, the esteemed professor of philosophy and logic, who suddenly became obsessed with the concept of unbeing, delivering impassioned yet utterly incomprehensible monologues in the quad about the negative ontology of the cosmos and the implied existence of non-Euclidean colours. His syntax became increasingly fractured, his logic circuitous and self-devouring, his once eloquent speech punctuated by strange guttural inflections. Colleagues initially attributed it to intellectual burnout, a philosophical crisis of profound magnitude. But Alistair noticed the common thread. These men, the brightest minds of Miskatonic, spent an inordinate amount of time in their offices and studies, spaces often proximal to the older, more extensive ventilation shafts. He also observed a subtle change in their appearance. Their faces grew gaunt, their skin developing a faint, almost translucent pallor, and their eyes, once sharp with intellect, now held a deep, unnerving luminosity, reflecting that same unholy colour Alistair had first seen in the lab flame. One evening, driven by a gnawing unease, Alistair ventured into the university's sub-basement, a rarely visited labyrinth of pipes, conduits and forgotten machinery. The air grew heavier, colder, permeated by the stale scent of dust and ancient masonry. The rhythmic thump-thump of the primary air handler echoed ominously. He followed the largest trunk line of the ventilation system, its riveted metal skin cold and slick to the touch, and as he moved deeper, he began to perceive it. The faint yet unmistakable shimmer emanating from the very ducts themselves. It wasn't a reflection, it was an internal emanation, a subtle pulsating light of that terrifying, indescribable colour. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, hearing not just the rush of air, but a faint, high-pitched whine, a sound that vibrated not in his ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. It was a resonant frequency that spoke of alien geometries and impossible physics. He imagined the unseen essence, this colour flowing through the steel conduits like a living gaseous plague, a spectral serpent coiling through the university's veins, seeking minds to infect, to warp, to shatter. His investigation deepened, fueled by a terrifying conviction. He sought out old university records, archival documents hinting at the meteorite incident. He found a fragmented report from a Dr. Willett, a physicist who had worked on the original sample. The report, heavily redacted, spoke of an unseen radiant energy, a unique chromatic anomaly, and a perplexing diminution of mass before the sample's ultimate disappearance. A marginal note, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "Not diminution, but trans-dimensional shift," or Ingress. Alistair felt a profound coldness grip him. Ingress. It implied the colour hadn't just vanished. It had entered something, transcended something, or perhaps simply spread. He pieced together the fragments. The sample, a thing of alien properties, a fragment of something other, had found a way to diffuse, to become an etheric contagion. And the ventilation system, designed to breathe life into the academic edifice, had become its unwitting distributor. The true horror, however, lay not in the physical degradation, but in the insidious corruption of the mind. Dr. Blackwood, Alistair's advisor, began exhibiting the early unsettling symptoms. His lectures on chemical bonding grew increasingly abstract, laced with references to crystalline structures of thought and molecular arrangements of pure concept that bore no relation to organic chemistry. His eyes, once shrewd and critical, now gleamed with an unnervingly zealous light, and he often spoke of seeing new patterns, hearing new frequencies in the most mundane laboratory equipment. Alistair witnessed him staring for long, rapt minutes at a simple retort stand, his lips moving in silent, fervent communion with the metal. The intellectual decline of the university's finest accelerated with terrifying speed. Professor Waldron, the mathematician, had retreated entirely into his office, its door locked and plastered with incomprehensible equations drawn in what looked like dried blood. Strange, guttural cries and frantic scrabbling sounds emanated from within. Dr. Albright, the philosopher, was found one morning in the university library, perched atop a shelf of forbidden tomes, declaiming a lengthy, disjointed sermon in a language no one recognized, his voice rising and falling in an inhuman cadence. His face was etched with a terrifying ecstasy, his eyes dilated, reflecting that accursed colour. Alistair's own mind, for all his efforts to remain rational, began to fray at the edges. The constant exposure to these subtle emanations, the pervasive, unholy shimmer that seemed to cling to the very air, chipped away at his sanity. He began to see the colour everywhere, not just in the labs or near the vents, but in the reflections on puddles, in the glint of distant streetlights, even in the prismatic refraction of ordinary sunlight through a window pane. It was a colour that twisted the familiar, making the mundane uncanny, filling him with a creeping sense of cosmic wrongness. Sleep offered no respite, only vivid, disorienting dreams. He dreamt of impossible geometries unfolding in a spectrum of unheard-of hues, of alien entities whispering secrets in a language of pure light, of a vast, indifferent cosmos where humanity was but a fleeting, insignificant aberration. He would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom after-image of the colour burn behind his eyelids, the strange whine of the ventilation system seeming to echo in his very skull. He realized then the insidious nature of the horror. It didn't kill instantly, it transmuted. It took the highest faculties of the human mind, reason, intellect, creativity, and twisted them into something monstrous, something alien. It didn't destroy genius, it perverted it, transforming ordered thought into a chaotic, incomprehensible madness that was, in its own horrifying way, still profound, but profoundly other. The university administration, initially baffled, then concerned, now struggled to contain the growing crisis. They attributed the madness to a stress-induced epidemic, perhaps a new form of mass hysteria brought on by the pressures of academic life. Physicians were called, psychiatrists consulted, but their conventional diagnoses proved futile. The afflicted did not respond to medication. They merely stared through their caregivers with eyes full of a terrifying alien wisdom, or shrieked about the colours beyond the veil and the whispers from the void. Alistair knew it was useless. He had to understand. He had to know the source, the extent, the true nature of the Arkham Spectrum. His search led him to the darkest recesses of the university's library archives, to shelves seldom disturbed, to texts bound in ancient leather, smelling of dust and forgotten knowledge. He sought books that spoke of preternatural colours, of alien entities, of cosmic horrors. He found fragmented references in dusty occult treatises, in madmen's diaries, in the cryptic marginalia of a forbidden Latin manuscript on astrophysics, written by a man who had famously vanished from Arkham in 1783. These scattered clues hinted at the existence of forces beyond human comprehension, of a universe teeming with unthinkably vast, indifferent intelligences. He learned of non-human radiation, of etheric contagions, of primal hues that defy terrestrial optics. He saw connections, chilling correlations between the plight of the university's scholars and the historical accounts of hermits and recluses driven mad by strange lights in the hills, by unholy emanations from deep chasms. The colour, he realized with a sickening certainty, was not just a physical phenomenon, it was a cosmic entity, a fragment of something ancient and terrible now loosed upon a world unprepared for its alien reality. One particularly harrowing night, Alistair witnessed the full, terrifying progression of the affliction in Dr. Theron Blackwood. He had been called to Blackwood's private laboratory, a vast space on the upper floor of the chemistry building, by a student aide who reported strange noises and a terrible smell. The air in the corridor grew thick with an acrid metallic odour, and through the glass panel of the lab door Alistair saw it, a pulsating, unearthly light, the indescribable colour radiating from within. He pushed open the door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The lab was a maelstrom of destruction and horrifying creation. Beakers and flasks lay shattered on the floor, their contents mixed into glowing, bubbling pools of various unholy shades. The Bunsen burners blazed with an intensified version of that alien hue, casting writhing shadows that seemed to distort the very dimensions of the room. In the centre, amidst a chaotic array of broken instruments and half-finished experiments, stood Dr. Blackwood. He was no longer the imposing scholar Alistair knew. His clothes were ragged, his hair wild, his gaunt face etched with a terrifying rapture. His eyes, however, were the most horrifying aspect. They glowed with an internal, multifaceted light, reflecting 1,000 subtle variations of the alien colour, utterly devoid of human recognition. He gesticulated wildly with bony fingers, muttering a stream of complex chemical formulae interwoven with phrases in an ancient guttural language, a dialect that seemed to twist and contort the very air. "The molecular bonds? They are but prisons!" Blackwood shrieked, his voice thin and reedy, yet imbued with an unnatural resonance. "I see it now, Finch. The true spectra, the unseen valences. This is the key to the ultimate dissolution, to the cosmic reordering. It reveals all. The colours, they sing." As Blackwood spoke, a faint, translucent aura of the unholy colour seemed to emanate from his very being, swirling around him like an ethereal fog. Alistair recoiled, a wave of profound nausea washing over him. The sight was too much, the implications too vast, too terrifying. Blackwood's genius, once a beacon of human reason, was now a conduit for something utterly alien, something that saw the very fabric of reality as a malleable substance to be reshaped by an unimaginable force. Alistair fled. The image of Blackwood's transfigured face burned into his memory. He ran through the darkening corridors, the hum of the ventilation system now a monstrous roar in his ears, the subtle shimmer of the colour seeming to coalesce into shimmering rivers flowing beneath the floorboards, through the very walls. He knew then that containment was impossible, that understanding was a pathway to madness, and that resistance was futile. The university, once a bastion of learning, became a charnel house of broken minds. The afflicted professors were eventually quarantined in a specially designated wing, their ramblings becoming ever more grotesque, their physical forms slowly but inexorably transforming. Their skin developed strange lesions, their eyes recessed into hollows that glowed with a sickening phosphorescence, and their voices, when they spoke, became a cacophony of inhuman sounds, a chorus of cosmic despair. Some withered into a catatonic state, their minds irrevocably consumed, while others raged, their genius twisted into a boundless capacity for self-destruction, for acts of inexplicable violence against themselves or their keepers. The administration, in a desperate attempt to maintain order and secrecy, spread a cover story of a virulent, unheard-of contagion, a novel form of encephalitis, but the fear in the eyes of the staff, the hurried whispers, betrayed the truth. The town of Arkham, a place already steeped in forgotten lore and shadowed histories, felt a deepening chill, a palpable sense of dread settling over its ancient stones. Alistair himself, teetering on the precipice of madness, found a desperate, morbid fascination driving him to record everything. He wrote feverishly, his hand often shaking, his prose growing more florid and archaic with each passing page, echoing the forbidden tomes he now consumed. He meticulously documented the symptoms, the transformations, the spread of the Arkham Spectrum, his own observations interwoven with increasingly fragmented scientific analyses and philosophical despair. He suspected with a certainty that gnawed at his very soul that the colour had not merely escaped, it had colonized. It had found a nurturing environment in the intellectual hotbed of Miskatonic University, its alien intelligence thriving on the ordered complexity of human thought, turning genius into a perverse nutrient. The ventilation system was not merely a conduit, but a circulatory system for this unseen, unspeakable entity, feeding it, nurturing its growth, extending its insidious reach. One dawn, as the first grey light filtered through the leaded windows of his cluttered study, Alistair heard it clearly. The high-pitched resonant whine, that sound that vibrated in his very bones, no longer just from the vents, but seemingly from the very air, from the walls themselves. He looked up, and there it was, unmistakable now, no longer a subtle shimmer, but a distinct pulsating glow of that unholy, indescribable colour. It emanated not just from the dusty corners, but from the very centre of the room, coalescing, thickening. It was no longer contained. It had seeped from the ducts, through the masonry, into the very atmosphere of the university, of Arkham itself. He felt its presence within him, a subtle thrumming behind his eyes, a strange clarity of thought, terrifying and alluring. He saw patterns in the mundane, heard whispers in the silence, felt the subtle currents of an alien intelligence flowing through his own mind. His sanity, he knew, was now a mere tattered veil, about to be ripped asunder. He picked up his pen, his hand trembling, and began to write his final entry, his last testament before the inevitable, incomprehensible transformation. He wrote of the boundless indifference of the cosmos, of the fragile facade of human reason, of the true, horrifying nature of the Arkham Spectrum, not a contagion to be cured, but a cosmic truth to be endured or subsumed. He felt a strange, sublime terror, an awe-inspiring dread, as the colour pulsed, brightened, and the world he knew began to twist and dissolve into an alien, vibrant geometry around him. He welcomed it in a way, for the unknown was finally known, and the price, though astronomical, was a terrible, unholy enlightenment. The air grew heavy with an electric ozone-like scent, and the very structure of his room seemed to waver, its familiar angles softening, melting into curves that defied Euclidean space. The colour, now a blazing, indescribable nebula, pulsed directly before him, seeming to draw him into its alien depths. He felt his mind expanding, snapping, stretching beyond the confines of terrestrial thought, encompassing vast, horrifying new perspectives. The whispers grew louder, clearer, no longer just sounds, but concepts, flowing into his consciousness, revealing the dreadful truths of the universe. As the colour enveloped him, dissolving the last vestiges of his human consciousness, Alistair Finch understood. The Arkham Spectrum was not merely a hue nor a force, but a consciousness, an ancient alien intelligence that had always been, waiting beyond the veil, waiting for the opportune moment, for the perfect conduit. And Miskatonic University, in its pursuit of knowledge, had unknowingly offered itself as a vessel, its brightest minds consumed and reformed, not into monsters, but into something far, far worse. Fragments of an awakening cosmic entity, now ready to spread its terrifying, beautiful, incomprehensible light upon the world. The last thing he saw before his eyes became mere mirrors reflecting the unholy, unspeakable light was the flickering, vibrant pulse of the colour, spreading inexorably, inevitably through the ancient, unsuspecting town of Arkham, a silent, beautiful apocalypse unfolding in an unnameable hue.